All right. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Okay, so welcome to this week's session. Okay. And as usual, right, we'll run through the markets over here, and of course, if you guys have any questions, feel free to put it into the chat as well. Right. So, welcome, Joseph. I do see your question about the German DAX. So we'll take a look in a while. Okay. But before we begin, just very quick one to at least have everyone aware, right? Because we're going into the holiday seasons. This week, Christmas as well as next week, New Year. So generally, there will be, I would say, less liquidity in the market. We don't really expect quite a lot of movement. Okay, but sometimes because of low liquidity, the market prices can actually spike quite a bit. Simply because there isn't much of a participants, right? So if there's like a one-sided order, prices can tend to move pretty erratic. Okay, so just bear that in mind for this week as well as next week, right? So this is something that we want to be aware of. Obviously, if there are opportunities and trade setups, um, I think it's still fine, right? Taking them, but of course, we just want to perhaps consider maybe reducing a little bit on our lot sizes, right? In terms of like the risk side of things, understanding that liquidity is a little bit lower, market might not move a lot, right? So you just need to have that patience in this 2 weeks as well. Okay. So with that said, let's update on what I'm looking at in terms of the euro. Okay. I need to actually zoom out a little bit for you to see the structure, right? Because this is a very huge kind of a triangle structure over here, where you can see that it started from here, coming down as a B, C, D, and potentially it's forming an E before another pushback up, right? As of now, this is the expectation, right? But of course, structurally, can this change? Can this pattern structure actually evolve itself? Possible as well, right? But that's one of the scenario that I'm looking at as a triangle. Now, if I zoom in, right, obviously right now the momentum seems to be pushing a little bit more to the upside. Whether are we gonna get a double top formation and then this would start to come down, we definitely need to see, right? As price tags this high, what is the reaction, right? Because we don't really have that information right now. Very likely price would actually break that high, but the question more importantly is how will price break it? Will it break and reverse back, or is it going to be a very strong impulsive break to the upside, right? Of course, if it's going to be an impulsive break to the upside, very likely this would then be seen again as a 1, 2, 3, right? As wave 3 development, and then wave 4, and then wave 5, right? We'll kind of need to update the entire structure, right? So we'll need to see. Probably this will give us, I would say, a little bit more confirmation only after the new year. Okay, so this is something that need to just be a little bit patient on it. GBP USD is very different in terms of the structure, right? So I think this one is clearer in terms potentially as a 5 wave structure. Whereas in terms of euro dollar, we are more like looking of a triangle, right? But as I mentioned, right, the triangle structure can actually rotate and evolve into following the path of pound, which is the 5 wave structure over here, right? So this is definitely bullish. The momentum is there to the upside. If we can get some sort of a corrective pullback, naturally that will open up a buy. The one thing you want to be aware of is this pullback here. There is that possibility of price retesting this low, right? So this low here is around 1.3290, right? Simply because if this is gonna just end up as a sort of a crawl diagonal structure, then this pullback can likely retest the start of the diagonal. Now, not necessarily needs to do that, but just saying that if this is gonna pull back correctively, right? Then there's a good odds this will continue higher. But if let's say price would just do a V-shaped reversal, then short term this can actually do something like that. Okay, so that's the take on pound. Overall, likely you just need to be patient and wait for the buy setup to come to us, right? Aussie very strong to the upside. Okay, kind of a V-shaped bounce here. So I think generally you want to be bullish on this, right? And if you kind of link all the major pairs together, you start to realize that $8 is actually weakening, right? If you look at dollar CAD, if you look at dollar yen, generally the dollar is weakening. Of course, if you look at commodities, gold and silver, even crude oil, right? All three of them are actually rallying quite significantly. Okay, so Aussie dollar over here with this impulsive leg to the upside, we are likely going to be bullish, right? We're definitely more on the buy side of things. Just want to be careful here is that can this pattern evolve into a regular or a slightly expanding flat structure before start going higher, right? So then this would form a 1, 2, 3, right? Very, very possible as well. The clue and the key here is how his price is going to react from here on, right? That means now it has break this high. How his price is going to react from here? Are we going to see some sort of a corrective move? If it is going to be a corrective move, then we can expect, short-term continuation to the upside. However, again, if this is just going to come back down very, very sharp, then we can expect price to take out that low before going higher, right? So really, the next move from here would give us some sort of a time projection. Are we going to be waiting for more of a deeper pullback, to look for areas somewhere nearer towards 6600? You look for a buy, or if this is going to come down correctively, then we don't expect the pullback to be as deep. Okay, so that's on the Aussie side of things, right? And then we have the dollar Canadian, okay, which I would see this very, very clearly as a 5-wave structure development. Potentially right now here is that wave 3 may be completing very, very soon. And of course, then we would naturally expect wave 4, right? Personally, I wouldn't be really looking into buying the wave 4, right? But more of like potentially waiting for wave 4 to complete and then see if we can get a sell trade set up. Okay. So in terms of Fibonacci, this would need to be updated quite regularly as long as price hasn't hit a swing low point, right? But generally the fits in terms of key area for wave 4 is going to be somewhere between 236 and 382 of the third wave itself, right? So as of now, it kind of put us around 1.38 to 1.3860. And of course, if you take a look at 1.3860, this confluence here is pretty neat. Okay, so this one here I feel is very, very clean. Is looking more of a 5-wave structure. If we get a corrective pullback to the upside, that's a sell side opportunity that you can actually look into. All right, so that's on dollar Canadian. Dollar yen, right? So that's the one that I mentioned, it came down quite strongly. So it seems like generally across board, the dollar is kind of weakening. Okay. But if I zoom out on the dollar yen overall, it's still in a bullish structure, it's still in a bullish state. From a wave pattern perspective, if you focus on the blue color here, right? From this low, we have the W, X, and Y. Right, so that's your 3-wave move. It gets a reset. Then from this low here, we have a W, X, and potentially Y wave in development. Okay. Now, can Y actually conclude at this swing high? Yes. But of course, prior to today's move to the downside, right? What we saw is this bullish move yesterday, right? So because of that bullish move yesterday and price actually successfully kind of take out this kind of trend, we are expecting more upside, okay? And that's where I kind of edited an update, right? Initially the projections here, now we expect this, okay? But of course, you can see how market has been kind of V-shaping here. So you just want to be a little bit cautious on things, right? Now, I did share out a trade setup on the dollar yen. Okay. So ideally, what we want to see on this setup is we do not want price to just immediately tag the entry area. But ideally, what we want to see is for price to bounce up a little bit from here. Okay. Not exactly as how I drew it. But generally, the idea is price starts to go up correctively and then only starts to come back down to the area. Okay, to give us some sort of a 3-wave structure, right? So then that setup itself would be ideal. Okay. So let's see how price is gonna develop from here. Obviously, I don't expect a lot of movement. Okay, but you can see dollar yen actually is quite a huge and significant move, right? From today here is from around 157.2. Right now we're trading around 156. So it's about 100 pips movement within the day itself. Um, it's not small, okay. It's not like the biggest day, but that is pretty significant as of today, right? And there's no major news in a way, right? So that's something to note. Okay, perhaps as I mentioned, liquidity is low. When there's a one-sided orders, prices tends to move a little bit easier. Okay, so my take on dollar yen, as I covered, right, we are looking at possible upside, but in terms of the setup over here, okay, we want to definitely wait for a corrective, have like move towards the area of entry. Okay. Um. Okay. So I see a question here. Why the up and down is both three-wave move? Generally, that's the observation we're gonna see in the market, right? That's where the principle of three-wave comes in as well. Okay. Oftentimes we can even use that as part of our forecast, right? Which means we expect the market to develop in sets of three. When a set of three has been completed, we can expect the market to then do at least some sort of a reversal, right? And we can then use this principle to extend it further, to use it for entry points and things like that. Okay, so that's a very, very good observation, right? Generally, the market does that, right? It tends to move in sets of three, especially in terms of the FX market. Okay, then of course we have gold, breaking its previous high and of course going into all-time highs, trading somewhere around close to 4,500 as of now. Will it go higher? Yes, right. I think I did share personally. I feel that gold or even silver, right, precious metals, is just gonna continue higher and it's gonna break all-time high. Okay, seasonally, meaning if you look at the historical past data, okay, precious metal like gold and silver, usually from around November going into next year February period, right? This couple of months, the seasonal data on gold and silver tends to be bullish, right? Meaning that there's a high tendency that at the end of the year, going into early part of the year, these two commodities tends to rally. Okay, so um, obviously I wouldn't suggest to be looking at buy at this current price point. Okay, because we are near the peak, we are at the peak. Definitely you want to look for buy. There's no reason to be selling it, but if you want to buy, then you want to wait for the pullback to get involved at a better price point. Okay, so then the question is more of like, will you get your setup that you want? Okay, because right now, obviously, you just need to be patient on gold if you're not in this position, and just wait for the pullback. Okay, I did take out one of my long term position on GLD, right? Because if I'm doing long term, I wouldn't do a CFD position because then I'll need to pay its overnight fee. Usually if you're going for long term, what I mean long term here is more like 6 months down the road, 1 year down the road. You want to consider some sort of an ETF position or even companies, right? Where you don't need to pay kind of overnight fee. So I did liquidate my GLD position to take some profits of it, right? That position was entered like back in 2002, 2003, right? Which is quite significant in terms of the upside. But moving forward, when we get a pullback, okay, I mean, it wouldn't be so soon, right? Probably it's gonna go into like maybe next year. Looking at the time projection over here, perhaps like closer towards after the new year, like following week. Okay, if that's gonna happen, then I'll be looking at positions to get involved in GLD again for the long run. Okay, because again, if you understand the macro fundamentals of precious metals, right? The long term is just going to be upside. Okay, so that's the part where if you are looking from that perspective, looking for a long term positioning perspective, then basically you'll be looking for buy only. Okay, So silver here, pretty similar, right? You can see is breaking all-time high. Now silver is more aggressive to the upside as compared to gold. Um, I did not really touch on silver in terms of the detail aspect of it this year. But basically, like last year, I recall, I did cover like why silver is something that a lot of people are not really focusing on, because a lot of times people will be more inclined to look at gold. But if you really look at these two precious metal, I mean, generally they are confluence, right? They are like correlated, okay? Um, but if you look at the percentage upside in the last 1 to 2 months, silver actually generated in percentage terms higher upside as compared to gold. Right. The thing here about silver is that as a commodity itself, it does have a utility value, right? Meaning, in businesses, in production, in constructions, we need to use silver. Okay. Whereas gold as a precious metal is simply having the status of a safe haven. Okay. Um, so with that, obviously both has its function, right? But if you look at it from a perspective where what has its utility functional value, naturally silver has it, right? And for that reason, okay, silver is something that you might want to also consider in terms of a long-term position. In a way where you can even consider like half-half, right? 50-50, meaning half of your long-term position in terms of like precious metal can go to gold, and then the other half, whatever you're prepared to allocate, you can actually consider like looking at silver. Okay. But of course, again, same thing as gold here. You probably do not want to jump in at this very moment, right? Price is at the top. You obviously want to wait for some sort of pullback first, right? Which, when will we get a pullback? Obviously, we won't know, right? But when the pullback starts, we will have that kind of signal, right? We'll know when the pullback starts, because naturally it needs to start forming a top, okay, and then it starts coming down. Ideally, it would come down slow, right? Now, when this first little leg of a retracement starts, that's where we can start to put in our fibs and kind of like do a little bit of adjustment and measurement in terms of like where would wave 4 likely conclude, okay? Which is somewhere around 236 to 382. But for now, I don't put in the fib. It's really because we wouldn't know whether wave 3 has concluded here, right? Okay, so same thing here. I see a question asking, how do we know wave 3 has ended? Right now, obviously, we don't have that clue, but as I mentioned, if I just play back a little bit, right, what I mean by that, okay, what I mean by that is obviously, if you go back to like something like this, okay, or even like one candle, one more candle here, right? So if you go back to something like that, okay, so if we go back to something like that, right? Obviously, when price is at the very top, we wouldn't know whether this is the top or price can continue higher, right? But as price continue to develop, you start to see, signs like that, right? So if you start to see something of a pullback here, maybe even move a little bit more up in terms of like that, right? So you can see that this move to the downside, okay, it's a little bit more significant, okay, relative to this entire leg here. Then we can say, all right, this would then be a swing point, right? That will be the high, and we know then that the pullback has started, and then this leg to the upside may have concluded. Okay, so that's the part that we want to wait and see now in terms. Let me remove the drawing, right? So as I mentioned, right, that's what we want to see right now over here, right? When price starts to pull back, we will get that signal. We'll know when it happens. Okay? So just be patient on silver and gold. Okay. Then for crude oil. Okay. Now crude oil here is interesting because just last 2 weeks, right? It kind of took out this low, right? But of course, price tends to break highs and lows. The thing here is when you take out a low, you want to observe how price is going to develop from there, right? What we saw is a little bit more of an impulsive push to the upside, which now opens up the idea where crude oil may actually go all the way back up and retest this high somewhere around 62.50. Okay. Now the thing here is this just going to be a temporary pullback where price can come down lower or not? The next development will give us a little bit more hint. If this pulls back correctively, right, meaning it doesn't come back too fast, then there's a good possibility we'll see more upside. Okay. Now, whether price will immediately go up and retest this high or not, and aim for that. But if you're looking for buy, let's say we're looking for buy here, for me, I would say it's a fair way to consider take profit somewhere around the 60 level, right? Which is, again, a psychological number. Okay. So overall, that's the take on crude oil. Now, touch a little bit about the commodities as well. Again, crude oil being a commodity that has a utility function. Okay. And generally, we are using this, on a daily basis as well across different industry in the world. There is that production value, right? So this is something I touched on previously as well. Okay, if there's a production value, then naturally the forces of demand and supply will come in. When prices drop below the production value, which means the market price is lower than what it needs to be producing it, then it doesn't make sense for supplier to continue producing it, right? Because they will lose money. Now, naturally, when they stop producing, then supply would drop, and then the demand and supply forces would kick in, right? Demand would stay constant, supply drops, prices would then go back up, right? So when you look at things like that, right, especially for crude oil, if you look into it, the production cost for crude oil here is generally around like 50 to 60 range. So the thing here, what it means, right, is that if today crude oil drops closer towards $50, then you know that the base is more or less there, right? In terms of like thinking from a trade or even some sort of a long-term investment, right? What's your downside, right? Your downside is basically crude oil drops to zero, which will unlikely happen, right? Obviously, futures contracts may happen, but if you're talking about CFDs, right, you're talking about tangible asset here, which is crude oil itself, right? The price of oil, it will never go to zero. Okay. So obviously futures contract did it before it went to negative because of how futures contract work, right? There's that rollover and everything else. But if you're talking about CFDs, right? If you are, we don't deal with physical crude oil. Thing here is at $50. Okay, the downside is actually very, very limited. Okay, so this is the part where, with that, right, sometimes when price of certain commodities drop to a certain area, which is relatively low, you want to have a little bit more conviction in like going in. Okay, I'm not a crude oil investor, so I don't obviously, kind of like look at crude oil for the long term. I don't actively trade crude oil as well. But this commodity, interestingly, there are some people who are keen and focus on that, right? So that's my take on it. And then hopefully that also opens up some insights for the rest of you, okay? So that's on my take on crude oil, okay? From technicals to fundamentals. Okay. Good. Okay, the label is too small. Okay, the label is not really the most important aspect, right? I think generally, if you can understand if you can understand the general direction that we're looking at, that would be more or less there, right? The label is more of like just to communicate that there's that parent specifically happening. Okay. Okay, S&P, right? S&P, NASDAQ, Dow Jones, in general, the US equities, I would look at more of the upside potential. We did get a very nice bounce off the 50% mark. Okay, Fibonacci over here, we did get a very nice little impulsive bounce. If this comes back down correctively, then we can expect more upside. Okay, seasonally, there's this thing called the Christmas rally as well, which going into the end of the year, stocks generally rally. But that's very, very short term in a way as well, right? It's just a couple of days, and then that's like the seasonal effect. If you ask me, like, what's the outlook for next year for equities market, I would say so far there is no sign of a market crash, at least from a macro liquidity aspect. Okay, and generally, if the Fed, which is what it is right now, is an easing policy direction, right, cutting rates, generally equities are going to be supported from there. Okay, so I would say going into 2026, at least for now, there isn't much of a reason to be too fearful, okay, from a bigger perspective, right? So what this means from a technical point of view then is if you get some sort of a opportunity to add position into a buy, that would be something you can consider, right? So again, I don't really kind of like trade the S&P specifically, but I do have a portfolio in the equities market, more of a dividend long-term thing, right? So this one here is more of sharing. For those of you who are looking into indices trading, okay, that's my take, right? So of course, we also look into the German DAX in a while, right? Because I think Joseph did ask about the German DAX, right? So that's my take on S&P. Generally still bullish on things. The idea here is we want to wait for a corrective pullback, right? That will be a buy trade opportunity. Okay, pound yen. Okay, so pound yen over here, we did get a pretty impulsive push to the upside. Okay, and we have a new invalidation level over here, which is 206.77. Okay, now market seems to be starting its pullback. If you can get a decent pullback over here, right? So if I can't pull in a fib, okay, let's look at the 50 and 618. That will put you around 209.20 to 208.60. Okay, if you can get a corrective pullback, of course, you also have some sort of a confluence area here. That would be an area to look for a buy. Okay, if I zoom out over here, okay, generally you can see this is basically a bullish structure. Okay, so pretty straightforward. Okay, in terms of pound yen, just wait for a market to pull back and then look for the buy trade setups. Okay, then we have AUD yen. So generally the yen pairs tends to move in tandem, but of course you can see the dollar yen, which we cover, slightly different, right? Because of dollar weakness. Okay, so if I zoom out a little bit over here, we are expecting something like that, right? Not the most ideal pattern, but this is your WXY, giving us a bigger W. A very, very shallow pullback, which is, again, as I mentioned, not ideal. Then we are expecting a three-wave move to the upside. Okay, we're expecting a WXY to form the bigger Y, right? So this is where your 1, 2, 3 is going to conclude. Okay, not the nicest structure overall, but currently that's what I would say is the most straightforward pattern and structure to project. Okay, so why we're looking at that, because we did have the market bouncing off this with momentum, right? If we can get a corrective pullback, which is what we are also looking at pound yen, then we can continue the expectation to the upside. Okay. Now, one thing that this is very, very different from pound yen is this break of the previous high is not as impulsive as the pound yen. Okay, if you look at pound yen here, this is more impulsive, this is less impulsive. Right? So generally, this means that the pound is relatively stronger than the AUD, supposing the yen would be constant, right, over here. So if you're looking at market correlation, then between the pound yen buy and the AUD yen buy, then the pound yen buy would stand out a little bit more. Okay, so that's on that. Pound Australia. Okay, so Pound Australia over here. Okay, we are looking at possible downside, right? So this one, if this little high here sticks, right? What this means is that we are gonna expect downside, complete a three-wave structure. Okay, so this would then possibly develop into the WXY structure. Yeah, but it's still at a very, very early stage, because what I would love to see is for price to take out some of this low. Okay, some of this low here. Ideally, we want to see price comes down impulsively. Then the pullback itself would give us the opportunity to look to sell, and then we can look to target all the way towards the low at 1.9815. Okay, so this is my take on pound AUD, right? We want to see how it can develop going forward. As I mentioned, ideally we want to see that impulsive drop. Okay, then that opens up the the sell side direction that we can look into. Okay, so pretty straightforward, right? Just need to wait for those conditions to fulfill itself. Okay, then we have the Bitcoin. Okay, so if I zoom out a little bit first to kind of show you the overall structure. Right, this is my take as of now, right? So we have this high. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Wave 4 potentially completed, and then we are in a wave 5 development. Okay, so that's the current expectation, that's the current forecast, and we are looking at wave 5 development to the downside. Okay, so if we start to zoom in from there, if we are looking at wave 5 development, and we kind of look at this here as wave 4 being completed, we have this move down. Okay, price seems to be pulling back. Ideally, it would push a little bit more towards 90,750. If we can get that correctively, right, that might open up a sell side potential for Bitcoin. Okay, now I'm not a huge crypto investor, but I don't short sell. Okay, I only look to buy Bitcoin, right? But of course, I don't buy it in terms of a CFD position as well. I buy it in spot, right? Meaning, you buy the quote unquote physical kind of a Bitcoin, okay? Which you don't. For me, I don't do leverage, okay, when I buy into it. So I'm not too keen in this downside, but I'm just sharing with you that short term this might happen, right? For those of you who are trading it on the shorter term, this can be an opportunity for you. But for me, I'll be more interested if Bitcoin drops lower and kind of completes this 5-wave structure, okay, around that 77,000 level, right? Because then that will give me another opportunity to get involved in Bitcoin at a relatively cheaper price. Okay, so that's my take on it. Okay, so that's on Bitcoin side. Okay, generally on crypto side. So very, very quickly, let me jump to German DAX. Okay, and kind of share with you my take on this, right? Because Joseph did ask, how do I see the German DAX at the moment? I was waiting for more of a correction before looking for buy setups. Okay, yeah. So my take here, right? This is on a 4-hour chart. I'll put in one thing that stands out very, very quickly first, right? So we have the market pushing up, okay? And then, of course, there's this minor low here, okay? And then the market kind of took it out, but very, very quickly reverses, right? So from an SMC model, this is what we call a liquidity sweep, which is great because this oftentimes indicates like it attempts to trap traders, right? It kind of like it give you a fake move to the downside, and then traders who trade the downside as a breakout will get trapped in that position, right? And then it immediately reverses. So this is actually a bullish sign, okay? And just working on this area here, Generally what we'll look out for. Okay, I mean, we do have like this momentum push here, market imbalance, if you're familiar with SMC model, right? If this actually pulls back, that gives you an opportunity to look for the buy side. Okay. Now, obviously, if this pulls back correctively, that will be ideal. But you also want to be aware that this can be a three-wave pullback that develop deeper. Okay. Now, of course, bear in mind in the markets, we will not know for certain what will happen, right? What we can do here is to analyze the market and kind of like prepare the various scenario in a way where you then plan out if this happened, what you're gonna do. If another scenario happened, what you're gonna do. Right? So the first scenario I cover for you here is that this is the low, right? We get this push to the downside correctively. We can look for upside push. Okay. The alternative over here is that this forms into a tree wave, right? And then that will come into this area here. Okay. And if that's the case, you'll be looking to buy somewhere there. Okay. So if you're a bit more conservative, you probably wait for this scenario. Okay. Why? Because if you're going to take fips from swing low to swing high, that will come very, very nicely confluencing that 50% mark. Okay. Now, if you're more aggressive, right, then obviously you'll be focusing more of the first scenario where you're going to be expecting price to just pull back here and then you're going to look to buy somewhere around this zone. Okay. Now, obviously, what can happen here is you can first look at this buy. If the market doesn't bounce up impulsively, but the market just gives you some sort of a tiny little reaction here, you can very, very quickly manage the position, maybe get out and then expect this to come down and then look for your second opportunity, right? So yeah, that little nuances that you can actually implement. Okay. Yeah, but that's my take. Okay. Hopefully kind of give you an idea like what my perspective on the German DAX is, at least from this scope, right? Which is what we're looking at is on the 4-hour time frame. Okay. Okay, euro dollar, I think we cover at the very, very start already. So I probably will not kind of repeat that. And then Irene here is asking for platinum, right? So let's take a look at that. I think PLT. Okay, there are a couple of different data feed. I will probably take this here. Okay. So the price might be slightly different because of data feed, but I think generally the pattern and the market movement is going to be the same. Okay, I don't really look into platinum, but it does seems like this impulsive leg here aligns with generally the precious metal, right, which is gold and silver as well. We are on the daily scale, so this is definitely a very, very significant push. Okay, so 4-hour time frame, right? Now, with what's happening over here, I would take it as this is the low point, okay, or I would say swing low. Currently, market is at a high, right? So I think same with gold and silver, probably not going to be expecting a buy here, but you want to wait for a corrective pullback. Okay, yeah, how long would that take? Right now, I don't have an expectation on that because we're still at the very, very top. Okay, until we see a clear sign that the market starts to correct, then we can do a little bit more kind of projection. But for right now, it's very, very difficult because the market is just simply at the very, very top, right? So there's really nothing much we can really talk about it, or even analyze at this very, very moment. Okay, I think generally looking at it being also part of the precious metal family, in general, it's going to be bullish, right? So focus on the upside direction, but same thing as gold and silver. You probably want to wait for the pullback first. Okay, so that's going to be my take on platinum. Next one here I see is from How, asking about crypto XRP, right? Okay, so yeah, let's take a look at XRP. Let me just zoom out a little bit to have a bigger view. Cool. Okay, it seems like it has actually came down to some of its key level over here and kind of made a bounce, right? So one time, two times, kind of like a triple bottom formation. However, one thing that stands out to me right now is that this little down move hasn't really break to the upside with momentum yet. Okay, so my take here is selling this at where it is right now may not make a lot of sense. Okay, I'm looking at current price point. The market is trading around $1.90. Now, can this asset goes to zero? Maybe, right? Because there's no real quote unquote tangible utility function. Okay. Now, obviously, the whole world is evolving, right? More and more people or organizations are starting to accept cryptocurrencies and things like that. Coins and things like that. But will a cryptocurrency goes to zero? It's still something that I'm not 100% confident and give you an answer and say no, right? But if you look at the perspective of, yes, if it goes to zero, right now price is at 190, right? Let's just put it at $2. Okay. If you're looking at the downside, what's your maximum profit potential is going to be $2. Okay. But if you look at upside, what's your profit potential? If today it's from $2, it goes to $4, that's 100% upside, right? So if you look at it from this perspective, right, when you look at certain investment ideas, you just measure what's your downside versus your upside. Sometimes it's a no-brainer to pick a direction, right? So in this case here, if you ask me, right, would I look at XRP and consider selling it at where we are right now? Obviously not, right? Because it's already below $2. What's my downside? My downside is literally $2. Okay, obviously, if I don't go in leverage, hey, you're gonna look into crypto in terms of like spot, in terms of like no leverage, right? You enter in a cash position. Your downside is literally $2, right? That's your risk. Okay, but your upside can be 100% because this itself has actually reached like that level before, right? I believe have, right? $4 and so, right? Okay, $4 not there yet, but very, very close, like 360, 17. Okay, so the upside potential is great. Okay, so that's the first perspective that I would put in, right, for this particular cryptocurrency. I mean, XRP is not a small meme coin as well. So generally, I would be a bit confident in that, right? Now, but what you want to take note is I would personally want to see some sort of an impulsive break above this specific trend line here, right? I mean, not like exactly like that, but in general, we want to see some sort of an impulsive break to the upside. Because we haven't been breaking this since November until now, the timing to really start focusing on the buy side of things is when price actually managed to break above that, right? And of course, you want an impulsive break, right? Meaning it breaks with momentum. So I think the analysis here is really not too complex. The idea is we focus on the upside, right? The directional bias is upside. In terms of like timing perspective, as I mentioned, we want to wait for the impulsive break and then the pullback to get involved for the upside. Okay. Yeah, so that's my take on XRP, right? Pretty straightforward. Good. Oh, yeah. So generally, that's what I have. Hopefully, has been clear. And of course, just want to remind everyone, I did mention this at the very start as well. This 2 weeks, this week and next week, we are in the technically holiday week. When we have Christmas, we have New Year. The market is going to be generally a little bit quieter, less liquidity. But sometimes less liquidity means, more kind of erratic movement in the markets, right? Swing up, swing down, kind of whipsaw a little bit, because less liquidity means one-sided order can easily move the market as well. So with all these factors, as we are trading within these 2 weeks, probably you want to reduce your risk a little bit, right? Reduce your position size a little bit. Okay. So with all that said, that's all that we have for today's session over here. All the best, right? Happy holidays, and as usual, I'll see you guys next week. And always, follow your plan, trade your plan, manage your risk well. Okay. So that's all for me. Good night. See you guys next session.